The aperture of your lens is the opening that allows light into your lens, and the aperture rating, or the f-stop as we call it in photography, is the number that describes how open or closed your aperture is. So this is a 1.5 35mm lens. So when it's at 1.5, it's the most open, and when it's at 22, it's the most closed. It's the smallest opening that you can get. When you see a lens and it's written 35mm 1.5, what that means is that is the maximum opening that your lens can have. It does not mean that this lens is not capable of other apertures. As you can see on the barrel of the lens, it goes all the way from 1.5 to 22. The wider the aperture you can get on your lens, the more light you can get into your lens, and so the better the low light performance of that lens. So if you're doing a lot of photography indoors where there's low light, you want something that can open really wide so that you have enough light under low light conditions to get good pictures. The other reason why lower aperture values like 2.8 and 1.5 for this one are important is because they control what we call the depth of field of your photography. Simply put, depth of field is how much of your background is going to be in focus. Let's say you've been asked to take a group photo at an event, whether it's a wedding or whatever it is. If you use your largest aperture on your lens, let's say this one is 1.5, and you take that picture, only the people in the front will be in focus. And so we control that depth of field by controlling our aperture. Now, if you're taking a close-up of, let's say, a wedding ring, or you're doing a portrait where you want the subject to stand out from the background, then you want to shift your aperture to something like 2.8. And f2.8 is one of the most popular apertures for portrait photography. For prime lenses, this is an example of a prime lens. You cannot zoom in and out. It only has one focal length, and that is 35mm. This is another example of a prime lens, and this one is 28mm. You cannot zoom in and out. For these lenses, you'll only get one aperture value on the barrel of the lens. So that value just tells you the largest opening that you can get on that lens. But if you look on the barrel of all these lenses, it then has other values going all the way up to f22. So you can shoot at f1.7 on this lens all the way to f22 on this lens. Now, if you have a zoom lens, like this one for example, you have a range that is written on the barrel of the lens. And this one is a 70-300 Canon lens, and the range for the aperture is 4 to 5.6. Now it's a bit complicated on the zoom lens because those two figures are still describing the maximum opening of your lens. For zoom lenses, the first figure describes the maximum opening when your lens is zoomed out. So the widest field of view for your lens, the maximum opening for this lens will be f4. So this will not be a good lens for low light situations because it cannot open any wider than f4. The second value on that range for this one is f5.6, is the same widest opening of this lens when it's now zoomed all the way like this. So the narrowest field of view. At the narrowest field of view, the maximum amount that your aperture can open changes as you zoom in and out. Now, there are some zoom lenses which will only have one aperture value. When you see that one aperture value, it means that it doesn't matter whether you're zoomed all the way out like this or at the widest, that lens will keep the aperture the same regardless of the zoom level. If you had set your aperture to f2.8 and you change the zoom level, that aperture will remain constant throughout the zoom range of that lens. And so those are called constant aperture lenses, and they are much more expensive than the normal variable aperture lenses. So I hope that all makes sense. So when you're choosing an aperture, there's no right or wrong aperture. It's really about what you're shooting and the effect that you want. If you want everything in focus, then you want the smaller apertures, and if you want things to be blurry in the background, then you want to use the larger apertures.